welcome back to our Walking in Faith channel here on YouTube. Today is actually our last character for our Old Testament character study. Today we're going to be looking in the book of Esther. Now we're not going to be talking about Esther. Now I'm sure if you're a lady and you've been to any ladies conferences, you're probably sick of hearing about Esther and Ruth. But today we're going to be looking at the story of Mordecai, who is a more obscure character within the story of Esther. Now, at this time in Israel's history, they've been taken captive. So they've been carried away to Babylon, and so this is quite a, this at this point in Israel's history is where I really struggle to relate, because I can't even really imagine what it would be like to be ripped away from everything that I knew, everything that I loved, to be carried away to this foreign land. But just by way of introduction, before we get too much farther into the story, I'm going to read just a couple verses that kind of set up nicely who Mordecai is. And so in Esther chapter 2, verses 5 through 7.
Can I just say that I don't want anybody judging us for the way we pronounce it.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of names in this, so we're just going to go for it. Yeah. It says here, now in Shushan, the palace, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. So here we are, our final one. We're tying it all off with another Benjamite. Verse 6, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So here we see a couple details about Mordecai. So Johnny, tell us a little bit more about who is Mordecai.
So he's a cousin of Esther, an older cousin, probably second or third, but he's taken in this orphan. But the Bible says in the verse you just read that he was living in Israel during this taken away. That they were taken away. The Syrians took away the northern kingdom. A couple 100 years later, the Babylonians took, and then now King Ahasuerus, which is the king of Persia at the time. So now we've seen some even transitions in this time period, and so he is again this Jewish person living in captivity, and he's raising his cousin Esther, who is going to, we know, become the queen of Persia. And so King Ahasuerus, we're not going to go into the story of Vashti, but he loses a queen. He was wanting to get another queen, and he's developed his mentors or his cabinet, saying, "Hey, let's do this. This would be a good way. Let's find the most beautiful woman in all the land and make her your queen, and we'll go through this selection process." And I don't think many people are unfamiliar with the story. They go through and select several different people, and Esther is chosen. She's beautiful. We see that in verse 7, and she's somebody that was fair. She was someone that was attractive, and so she is gathered up to be a potential candidate for this position of queen, and she's going to be secluded for a year through this beautification process and being treated and being prepared to see the king. But even during that time, Mordecai is again this father figure. He's her cousin, but he is really like a father to her. He's taken her as his own, and he said, "Hey, let's not reveal your heritage." And the Israelite people, the Jewish people, this anti-Semite is not new. It's not a 20th century thing. This has been for millennial. You've had people despise God's nation of Israel, and so he said, let's keep that under wraps. Let's not tell anybody. And every day he would come to the gate of that house to check in on her. So he is this father figure. He loves her. He's trying to take care of her, and he's also trying to give her wisdom and walking through some of these steps of what's going on.
Okay, so yeah, I always forget that he's not, I always think of him as being her uncle, but I forget he's a cousin, just because of the way he kind of takes care of her. So that's pretty cool. So what else does he do? Why did he make it?
So there's a lot of things that we can look at that Mordecai did, and I think the first interesting one is that he really saves the king. So because Mordecai is coming to the gate every day, he's checking on Esther. He hears the plot of two of these guards. They're going to kill the king, and they're going to usurp the king and allow the person they want to be king to take the throne. And he hears it, turns in that information to find out it is true, and the king has them killed. And so because of Mordecai, the king is even alive to pick a queen and potentially pick his cousin Esther. But nothing happens at that point. Like he does this, and we know this is important to the story. It's just beautiful. Just God's in control of all things, even timing of all things. That later we'll see, and we'll talk about it. But it's just neglected or forgotten. But he does save the king, and then he really. I see him as like so many of our characters we studied. They may be obscure or not as much talked about, but Mordecai is very strong in his faith, and there's this man elected. We know him as Haman or Haman. Some people pronounce it that way, but he is put in second in command. And so there's a lot of provinces, there's a lot of kingdoms, these ancient empires. They're ruling over hundreds of nationalities and municipalities, and they have this organization. They have local government, but then they have this central government, and that's where we're at. And so Haman is almost like a prime minister. He is overseeing day-to-day operations. The king is ultimate, but there's no way the king, he's too important to deal with some of the minutiae. And so Haman, in his elevated status, would be reverenced. He would be bowed down to. And Mordecai's like, I'm a Jew, I bow down to no one but God. And it sounds very stern, but so he's very strong in his faith, he's strong in his opinions, and Haman hates Mordecai. And so it's interesting from the beginning, we know how the story ends. Esther becomes the queen. But before that's any revealed, before Esther's picked, you see this hatred, this animosity between basically the queen's father and this man that's second in command. Like it's just gearing up for just a clash somewhere down the road. And so he saved the king. He defies Haman or the world and says, I'm not going to bow down to you. In Esther 3, it says that Haman, because of Mordecai, sought to destroy all the Jews. So you're talking about the hatred of just how prideful this guy is. Man, there's this man that won't bow down to me, and he's a Jew. I'm going to kill every Jew. Like, that's where his mind went. Like I can't process that amount of wickedness. Like it's just evil. And so that was his thought. And so he's developed this scheme to let's remove these people. So I want to read verses 8 through 9, which does take a little bit of time, but it says there was a certain people. This is Haman talking to King Ahasuerus. It says there's a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom. So the Israelites had been just totally dispersed, and God, that was a prophecy that the children of Israel would just be dispersed throughout the entire world. And that's where we see the phrase in the New Testament, synagogue. That's where the synagogue became an integral part in the Jewish heritage and culture, is they no longer had the temple. The temple was in Jerusalem. The temple was destroyed. It was rebuilt and then destroyed again. But they developed these synagogues. So anytime, I want to say it was Philippi, maybe I'm wrong and I didn't do my study, but in order to have a synagogue, you had to have 10 Jewish men. And there was one city Paul went to that they were meeting at the river because they didn't have 10 men to constitute a synagogue yet of Jewish people. But they built these synagogues to adhere to Jewish, to read the law, to study the law, to keep their culture. So even though they were dispersed, the Israelites had maintained a Jewish culture. They were very distinct from the people they lived amongst. And so Haman is making that case. He's saying there are people living in your provinces, all of your provinces. They're scattered abroad, but they're remaining different. They're different than the rest. And it says their laws are diverse from all people, which is true. They were trying to follow God's law. Neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore, it is not for the king's profit to suffer them or to allow them to keep doing this. Verse 9, First King of Esther 3. It says, if it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business to bring it unto the king's treasury. So he's saying, let me go out and destroy this people. And after I destroy them, any of the bounty, any of the goods, we'll put it into your treasury, and this is going to benefit you. Ahasuerus, this is a good thing for you. And because it was in the name of the king of Persia, it was sealed with his ring, and the laws of the Medes and the Persians were not able to be revoked, even by the king. And we see that later in the story of Daniel as well, later or earlier. But anyway, the king made a decree, and it could not be changed even by himself. So Mordecai is going to save the king. He's defied Haman, and it's caused Haman to now want to destroy the Israelites or the Jewish people. And then what happens then, Mordecai, Esther is chosen as queen. Haman has, unbeknownst to himself, issued a death sentence to the queen that was just selected by King Ahasuerus. He's really passed the sentence that the queen's going to die. He doesn't know it yet. And neither does the king. Like, the king signed his wife's death wish, death sentence, and he didn't know. He wasn't aware. But Mordecai is then going to go to Esther and challenge her. Esther has kept his advice. She's not revealed to herself to anyone as a Jewish person. And he has ripped his clothes. He has put ash on his head. He is in mourning, and the servants come. Hey, that man that you talk to in the gate every day, something's happened. And so she finds out, and he says, hey, the Jewish people, your people, are about to be destroyed. And it's interesting, in Esther 4:8, it says, show unto Esther, this is Mordecai talking to her servants, she's the queen, show it unto Esther, and to declare it unto her, this command of Haman, and to charge her that she should go into the king to make supplication to him, and to make requests before him for her people. So at that point, if no one knows that Esther is a Jew, her servants immediately know. Now, he's telling her to go on behalf of her people, the Israelites. And so they figured out, maybe they've already figured it out, but they now know that Esther is a Jew. The king doesn't know, Haman doesn't know, but we're going to see that they're about to find out.
Yeah. So this is a scary time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even for Esther, even though she's in a protected place, she's queen. I doubt very seriously somebody would have wanted to go in and kill her, but they had every right to. She also was in a state of I don't know, but the entire group of Jewish people, and this is down the line. This was not something that's going to happen tomorrow. This is months down the line that the people are going to kill the Jews and gather all their possessions and take them for the king, and even be getting profit themselves for doing it. But Mordecai is going to challenge her, like, hey, I want to read verse 13 to 14. We're talking about people being sick of Esther, because this verse is used a lot, not just in Lazy. It's a great passage, and that's why it's used so much. It's a great story. It says, then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther. She responded, I can't just go before the king. And there's some rules and there's some policies in place that she has to be called to go to the king, not just step in front of him. And it's been a long time since she's seen him. And she says, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. He said, hey, do you think this is just not going to affect you? It's going to affect you personally. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed, and who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? So Mordecai shows great faith. Hey, God is going to deliver his people, whether with you or someone else. That's what I really read in verse number 14. He says, but don't you think God has placed you here for this reason? That's what that phrase at the end, for such a time as this. So his faith challenges Esther to have faith and trust in God, to do what is necessary, which we know she does, to stand before the king and to attempt to save her people.
That's something that I think we've been able to see in several of these more obscure characters, is that their right actions, their faith,
Correct.
is kind of a catalyst
Yeah.
for others to do right, for others to follow God.
Yeah.
And that's exciting to see that here.
I mean, you even think about modern times. You think about D.L. Moody. D.L. Moody was challenged by a Sunday school teacher. And I don't remember the Sunday school teacher's name by hand.
No.
But I know there's a book by him. I've read it before or about him. But, man, he was challenged. And the Sunday school teacher, man, I praise God for Sunday school teacher.
Yeah.
That would be faithful. That would take him or just mentor him. And D.L. Moody had a great ministry that's still active today.
Right.
Hundreds of years after, 150 plus years after he died, however long ago it was. And so sometimes we think that I want to encourage, maybe it's a pastor or a ministry, someone in ministry, we think, well, I'm not pastoring a large church. But you may be that person in someone's life. Like there may be a young person in your life or in your church that goes on to do far more, have a far bigger impact in the world's mind. But I think God gets the glory for these obscure people in the background. Mordecai is a name most people know, but his faith, again, like you said, is that catalyst to then push Esther. She could have died walking before the king. But she's like, hey, my dad, Mordecai, my cousin, he has faith. He believes God is going to save his people, and he believes I'm here for this reason. And it gave her assurance that she was able to step forward and do what she needed to do to save her people. And the rest of the story is very familiar to us. She has this party. She invites Haman and the king only. And the king's like, hey, tell me why you brought me here, because anything you want, I'll give it to you. And she's like, come back tomorrow. Well, they leave. Haman walks by and sees Mordecai. And instead of being, man, I can't believe I was able to have dinner with the king and the queen, just us. Instead, all he could think about is, man, that stupid Mordecai wouldn't bow down to me at the gate. Like, I can't believe his life makes my life miserable.
Right, yeah.
And again, a wicked wife says, hey, why don't you just go build a Haman? Haman built a gallows, and he built one 70 feet tall so that everybody could see. And why don't you hang Mordecai? So he's coming before the king the next day, before the party. He's like, hey, king, there's this guy I want to kill because he just really gets on my nerves. I don't know how else he's going to say it. But again, that sovereignty of God, didn't allow Ahasuerus to sleep that night. And in his tiredness, or in his just weariness, they didn't have Netflix. What didn't pop up on the screen, like, are you still watching?
Yeah.
He didn't have that opportunity. So he had people read to him, and they read the story of Mordecai discovering the plot to kill him. And he's like, hey, did anybody do anything for that guy? And like, no, nothing was done. So he's like, who's in my entryway? Who's wanting to make entrance to my throne room? And they said, Haman. He said, bring him in. So he brings him in and he says, all right, Haman, what would you do to honor someone that has done something for you? And he's like, oh, the king's about to honor me. And he gives the answers what he'd want. Put him in the king's robe, put him in the king's horse, and have him just walk through the entire city and by someone very important declaring what this guy did. And he's thinking he's about to be escorted on the king's robe. Again, very, very prideful.
Yeah.
Only to find out it's Mordecai. I just love that part of the story. To where Mordecai is walked through the city by a guy that hates him so much, he wants to kill all of the Jews. And Mordecai's aware that this is Haman's. It's very well known between the two that Haman hates Mordecai so much that he's made this policy. Mordecai knows that Haman is behind this policy, and yet he's been escorted through. And he goes home and he pouts, like we see in Ahab last lesson we did. And they come and get him and say, Mordecai, Haman, it's time for this second feast you're expected before the king. And only to find out that at that time the king says, why did you bring me? Well, I brought you here because that man is trying to kill me. The king gets mad, walks out. Haman tries to beg for his life to Esther. The king walks in and he's on her bed, which means that he's just bowed before her, but it had some very sensual connotations. Like he is not only trying to kill my wife, now he's trying to maybe rape my wife. Like, what is this guy doing? Yeah. And instantly they put a cape over his head. He's not allowed to speak, and they go hang him on the gallows. And ultimately, not only was Mordecai paraded through the city by Haman, Mordecai was given Haman's house, was given Haman's position, and he was elevated to that second in command. And really pretty amazing, because then ultimately Mordecai is now the prime minister. So what did Mordecai do? A lot of behind the scenes things, and then now once it's revealed that he is basically the queen's father, and all the wisdom that God gave him to handle all those situations, the king recognized and said, hey, I want you to take his place.
Yeah, that's so cool. So there's a lot there. What are some key takeaways for us?
I think it's important to see how compassionate Mordecai was. He took in an orphan that, yes, it was family, but he didn't have to do that. Yeah. Right? That was something that he could have excused, or it could have been too expensive. It's a faraway country. No one would have known that he forsook a cousin, or forsook a family member. But he was compassionate, and he wasn't just compassionate in raising her. He genuinely cared for her. He checked in on her. He was walking her through this probably had to be a pretty intense, scary situation that Esther found herself in, being separated for the king's potential queen for a year. and he was compassionate to her. And I think, a lot of times we mistake, loving people for liking people, but I don't have to like every person, meaning I don't have to be best friends with everyone. I'm not commanded to be best friends with my enemy, but I'm supposed to love them. I'm supposed to be compassionate. I'm supposed to be giving of myself to others. And Mordecai was self-sacrificing. He was compassionate to Esther. So,
oh, no, that's so good.
And then we just see the wisdom that he had.
Yeah.
And the Bible says in James that if we lack wisdom, that's something we need to ask God, and God will give to all men that asketh. He said, I'll give to all men liberally, and upbraideth not. I mean, he's not going to hold back. Wisdom from above is what we want. Mm-hmm. And so wisdom is the proper application of knowledge. So Mordecai was aware of what was going around. He had knowledge, but then he also was able to show wisdom of how to maneuver, or how to what to do in those situations. I mean, for example, he had the plot. Well, what do you do? Well, he went and told the authorities. He handled it correctly. Haman, what do I do? I'm not bowing down. He did what was right, even though it might have been difficult. Hey, Esther, don't reveal yourself as a Jew. Esther, now reveal yourself. Like he just had very keen insight. God gave him and granted him wisdom to know how to maneuver.
Yeah.
And even reversing that irreversible. We didn't get to this part of the story, but when Mordecai is elevated to second command, he could not change the law, but he made a new law stating that the Jews were allowed to defend themselves. And the Jews killed people that tried to kill them. And at the end of the day, the Jews were victorious. We know that. But God gave him wisdom. Instead of saying, hey, there's nothing we could do, let's just go hide somewhere for that day of death. Instead, it became a day of celebration. And so Mordecai was no doubt connected to God. Some of these things that we see Mordecai was able to do in decisions, it's not something that's just a carnal wisdom. It was definitely a godly, spiritual wisdom that he had.
Oh, no, that's awesome. What else do we see?
So we see that he was not, he had courage, like so many people we've talked about in this study, to stand for his beliefs. I'm not going to bow down. I'm not going to worship you, which I only serve one God. And you're not it. So no matter what you tell me, just much like the 3 Hebrew children, we're not going to bow down to your God. And if I die, I died, but I'm going to die on my principles and die doing what's right. Mordecai had courage, but he also had hope. Again, he told Esther, God's going to save his people. Now, you and your family may be wiped off the planet, but God is going to save his people. Yeah. God has made promises to us. And he's holding on to those promises. And this is a guy that had seen Jerusalem. He was living in Jerusalem. He might have been young, but he saw Jerusalem. He saw the temple. And he was holding on to the hope that God has this place for us. And we know ultimately they return. And I think at this point they've already returned and started. Ezra and Nehemiah are contemporaries at the same time or before. I sometimes lose track of the timing. But he had hope in God. He believed that God was not done with the Jewish people, when at a time that it would be very easy for Mordecai to say, it's done. Like it's toast. There's no hope.
Yeah. Not only have they been scattered, not only are they living in this wicked nation, he has this guy Haman who hates his guts.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it would be easy to throw in the towel, I guess, so to speak.
That would be a good way to put it, but he didn't. And ultimately, his faith was rewarded. Now, we don't believe a prosperity gospel that says if you do right, all these things are going to be given unto you.
Right.
But at the same time, we do believe Hebrews 11:6. He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. And I think some of our rewards, we think of fleshly or temporal rewards, and that's the wrong mindset. But Haman, we see that principle. And the Bible tells us in 1 Corinthians, the Old Testament, these characters that we're studying, they're written for our example. So we see how God interacts with his people. God says, if you have faith, you trust me, do right, I will bless you. And Haman was killed. God took care of his enemy, and Mordecai was elevated. Now, again, that doesn't mean that if you do right at your job, tomorrow you're going to be made the boss. And that's not what we're saying. But God does reward faithfulness. And you live a lifetime. I've preached a lot of funerals in my 13, 14 years of ministry, and I've yet to stand at the deathbed of someone and say, man, I wish I'd have done less for God. Or, man, God was unfair to me. Or God, and there's been a lot of godly people that I've seen pass that were thankful or wish they would have done more, and were thankful for all that God had done in this lifetime. And sometimes I think we lose sight of what true blessings are. You know, we're looking for the temporal. We're looking for the position like Mordecai was given. But man, we have life, and that's amazing.
Yeah.
We live in a free country, which is amazing. I have children, and I have a place that I can worship, a church family, and God has bestowed blessings on us that we can't lose sight of. So when we need to consciously always be aware of the blessings that God has given us.
No, that's so good. Mordecai is such an interesting character. I think he's such an essential part of Esther's story as well. So, well, thank you all for watching through these episodes that we've been able to do together. This is the end of our Obscure Character Study series. Stay tuned though, keep your eyes open this fall. Here at our ministry here at Faith, we also have a Christian school, so our lives are about to get a lot busier as that kicks up in our schedule. But we will be putting out different videos, probably some more topical, more practical things here and there, and I know that those will be a benefit to you as well. But again, if today's episode was an encouragement, go ahead and share it. Subscribe to our channel just so that God's Word can get out there to as many people who need it. But again, until next time, we hope that you continue walking in faith.